Gorn is one of those classic VR games. If a game came out before Quest 2 or 2020, then I would consider it a classic. It's a gory gladiator fighting game with fun and janky combat mechanics that makes the game incredibly charming. At the time, the cutting edge of VR combat was Skyrim VR. You can tell that Bethesda had no idea what they were doing when they made this weightless, terrible combat. That's where Gorn came in. Where Skyrim took everything seriously, Gorn makes these identical floppy muzzle heads stumble themselves at you. All the weapons are comically large and floppy. The gore system here is incredible, with each segment of their body being destructible and detachable. They were able to have such an in-depth gore system when the competition was so lacking, because they put all their efforts in enemy design into two main models, being the basic enemies and their larger, more menacing brothers. It allows for small details like knocking their teeth out, or stabbing their chest and taking their heart out. Being an early VR physics-based game, there's obviously going to be some jank, but by the game not taking itself seriously and having intentional jank, it allows the moments where something does happen to be shrugged off as part of the experience and can even build upon it. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers, so subscribe and join the Discord in the description. Back to the video. The plot of the game is that you're a gladiator at the bottom of the ranks, so you face off against some of the king's favorite competitors, and every time you succeed, it's an upset victory. So basically the plot's a Ratchet Deadlocked, but without the capitalism. There are 3 layers in the elevator, and each has 3 levels that have you face off against their own final champion after you make it through the basic enemies first. Anyway, the first layer is the basic arena with basic enemies. They let you get used to the game and typically have no armor, and when they do, it doesn't protect them very much. It's good that they let you get used to the controls, because boy are they strange. For one, you don't use the joystick to move, you hold down a button and drag your arm. Okay, editing note, you can actually use the joystick, but the original experience was dragging, and I think in a way it makes the game more enjoyable. It's hard to get used to, but once you do, you just forget about it. At least when you aren't running for your life, which can get incredibly tiring. Also, when you get hit, you start dying. You need to kill an enemy before you die. It's basically the same death system as Boneworks and Lab. But in those games, you have health points before you start to die. It raises the stakes, and the more times you get hit, the shorter the period to get a kill and survive. It can only make you lock in when you're getting sloppy with your attacks, especially against a boss. Speaking of bosses, they're basically normal enemies with their own gimmick. Like Achilles, he's covered in almost impenetrable armor and seems pretty much invincible. The first time I fought him, I flailed at him aimlessly and died. Then I remembered who I was fighting and noticed his ankle didn't have any armor. And just like the legend, he dies from a single hit to the ankle. Moving on to the second layer, the arena is a lot bigger, and the enemies are more armored, making it tougher to kill them. There are a bunch of cool weapons throughout the game, and my favorite ones are the ones that can cut, as they can slice heads and kill in one hit. Most of the weapons are fun to use, and there are even special gloves like this metal Hulk gloves that obliterate enemies. There are these crossbow gloves that remind me of Guts' repeater in his prosthetic hand. There are all sorts of different hands, and they all really mix up the style of combat in their own unique ways. The standout boss of this layer is the Badgermancer, who has 2 badges that he throws. They can decide to either attack you and slow you down, or to eat their own master. It can be a really funny fight when they just turn on him. The final layer introduces these giant enemies. They make it feel like a struggle to survive, and are really tough. This layer is basically Giant World in Mario 3, where everything is just huge. Once I run out of VR games to review, I'm definitely doing that game. But back to Gorn. There are also these pits that instantly kill enemies when they fall in. They level the playing field when there are much tougher enemies. In one of the levels, you pretty much get Guts' sword, which is cool. Big foes take big swords to kill. The giant hammer is also fun to use, and it demolishes armor and sends enemies flying. Some waves have special challenges, like kill a certain amount of enemies, or kill with a single arrow. They give you a fun challenge that breaks up the sometimes generic waves. In one level, you get given a gun, which is really fun to learn the mechanics of, and it also shreds enemies and explodes their heads in a really satisfying manner. If I wasn't so desensitized to VR gore, I think this would be quite concerning. If the gore isn't your thing, you can use an option to make enemies piñatas with candy instead of blood. I'm convinced this setting is just for YouTubers that get too scared to get demonetized. There's a boss fight with this giant guy and a little sidekick on his shoulder. It's nothing special. The next boss is special, however. You're given a mallet and a guy riding a crab shows up. You gotta kill the guy and then crack the shell of the crab. For some reason, it just felt so wrong killing the crab. It might have been the fact that it had all these scuttling legs, or just how gory it is seeing its guts underneath. After that is the final boss fight against the king. He spawns in waves of previous boss fights, making chaotic interactions with multiple bosses at the same time. As well as this, the spectators maniacally scream and swoop at you. You must hit them into the king multiple times to kill him. The whole time, you have to juggle these endless enemies, and it can be incredibly frantic when you hear the spectators when fighting off a horde of enemies. You kill the king and the credits roll. The boss fight is fun and satisfying to play. Once you beat the game, you can still mess around with the sandbox mode and play with all sorts of settings. It's fun to lose a couple hours in. Overall, the game as a whole is a great time and definitely holds up after all these years. Definitely play it if you haven't yet. After playing Clone Drone, I was itching for a similar experience, and I definitely got it here. Anyway, that's going to be the end of the video. Subscribe so I can look forward to Quest 3, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.